Hey guys, Mr. Buckwheat here, bringing you another tutorial on fully automating your Plex server. Now, today's going to be a good one because we're going to be going over Sonarr and Radarr. Now, what are Sonarr and Radarr? Sonarr and Radarr are PVR applications that help manage and organize your media libraries. Sonarr focuses on TV shows, whereas Radarr focuses on movies. I'll also be covering Prowlarr, which helps synchronize specific settings to Sonarr and Radarr, as well as the famous trash guides profile and custom format setup. I'll show you how to install and import these formats and profiles so that way you can have a ranking system to your content, making sure that you have the best versions available. Now, before we get started, I just want to point out that this is a multi-part series, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel as well as leave a like. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. And if you're looking for a little bit more of a one-on-one situation, I do offer personal services. You can reach out to me via email or on Discord. Now, before we begin, let's boot up that virtual machine, as I'll be covering two instances on Ubuntu as well as installation on a QNAP system. So let's dive right in. All right, here we are on my QNAP desktop. Now, before we begin, just want to start up the virtualization station and my testing environment, which is Ubuntu, running on that virtual machine. So that's up and running. We're good to go. And if we just kind of look at Portainer here, you could see these are the same containers that we had set up in the previous tutorials. And I also have all of my my networks configured with my NFS mounts for my different scenarios, depending on which way you guys have. But just to go over that real quick. So if you're on QNAP, again, what I recommend doing is having everything inside of a media folder. So mounting, a shared folder, call it media, call it data. For this instance, I'm using media. And then I have all these subfolders inside of it. Movies, TV shows, downloads, books, you name it, it's in there. So everything's going to be inside this folder, and that's very important to follow this. I go over this in my other tutorials and the other videos covering why we want to set this up for the organization. And then I also have everything stored in a container folder for all my settings, for all my for all the containers that are running, everything that we're going to be setting up, keeping this nice and organized. So that way, when it comes to backing up, or transferring or upgrading, whatever the case may be, you know where everything is, you have access to it, it's going to make life a whole lot easier. And the reason why we're going to be doing this, especially for the media folders, is because of what's called hard links and atomic moves. So before we begin, I just want to kind of cover this, and I'm going to head over to a website that you guys are going to be very familiar with by the end of this video, because I'm going to be citing this website multiple times. In case you haven't heard of this, I recommend you bookmark this link. This is the famous trashguides.nfo website. Now, this is fantastic. This community has put together a full-on documentation wiki covering everything under the sun when it comes to Sonarr and Radarr. And this is what I've come to use over the years. I wish I knew about this when I first set everything up. So hopefully you guys, even if you already have your stuff set up and you haven't heard of this website, check this out. I'm going to be referencing everything on here, showing you how it works, showing you how to set stuff up. So it's going to make your life a whole lot easier, especially if you haven't heard of this. This is like, finding the golden nugget. So, okay, back to what we were talking about before with hard links and instant moves. So what are hard links and instant moves? So real quick, just the real short answer, again, just pulling from Trash's website here. The short answer is having a file in multiple locations without using double your storage space. So what that means is, when you start dealing with, downloading files or moving things around from different folders, whether it's a download folder or a rip folder or wherever it is, into your library, what happens is when you have things set up in Docker, when it comes to mounting folders, if you're not setting those up correctly, you're going to start creating duplicate jobs, duplicate files, unnecessary reads and writes. This is what's going to help keep things organized, especially when it comes to these larger files, especially some movie files that are upwards of maybe 80 gigabytes in size. So when we set these up the right way, we're going to relieve a lot of stress on the server, especially some of you guys that may have maybe a smaller server where it's just an external hard drive where your space is limited. The last thing you want to be doing is having multiple copies of an 80 gigabyte file on there, when it's not needed, it's not necessary. And then atomic or instant moves or atomic moves, those are just basically when you're moving those files around, because of how the Docker environment works, provided you set up those volumes the correct way, they're going to make these moves instant, because you're not copying an 80 gigabyte file to another folder. You're literally just changing the link or changing the pointer address in there, so that the information where it's stored on the disk is still there, and it's using the original information rather than copying it over again. So when you move something maybe from like a RIP folder or a download folder to your library, it takes less than a second. Even if it's an 80 gigabyte file and the hard drive is less than 100 megabytes per second in terms of read-write speeds, the transfer will be instantaneous. And that's what we want. We want efficiency. We want to be able to move stuff around very, very quickly. And just kind of pointing this out too, if we head over to Radarr's website and we go to the download tab here, and you can install this. You can follow along this tutorial and install this on any device. That's the nice part about this, is I'm going to be kind of going over all my settings and everything here. But let's just kind of follow along here with the Docker installation. They do mention this right here in terms of, for the common pitfall about setting this up. So what we just talked about with the hard links and the atomic moves, kind of be aware of that. If you're following my tutorials and you're doing it the way that I'm doing it, you're going to be setting it up the proper way, which is what they're calling for. And the reason why they point this out is because we're going to be using the Linux server today. But if we head over to the Linux server and grab the information that we need, in this case, the compose file here, if you take a look, they do list these optional paths or these optional volumes that are incorrect. And a lot of people, what they'll do is they'll just kind of copy this over and put it into their, their tab or whatever the case may be. And the problem with that is unfortunately, it's incorrect. It's going to be causing all those extra read writes that aren't needed. So if we head over to Ubuntu, and again, we'll just kind of real quick go over the settings that we have here. So I have two different scenarios for Ubuntu. We're going to talk about scenario 1, which will be everything installed on one device. So what that would look like is I have a media folder with, movies and TV shows in there. Scenario 2 would be I have this device acting as the parent device, and I have maybe an external hard drive, or I have a NAS, or multiple NASs that are going to be storing everything, and I have those set up via an NFS mount. I covered this in the previous tutorials. Check out those videos if you haven't already, covering how that works. But really, those paths in there will just be NFS media. Now this is to the main QNAP. In there I have a test folder with another media folder, and that has all the files and folders that we're going to be using for the testing purposes. Again, we set this up in the previous Plex video, so we're going to be using both scenarios to set those up. So what does that look like? If we go over to Portainer, we're going to head over to our container tab, and we're just going to click add container. So we're going to call this, since we're starting with Radarr, we're going to call that Radarr. And the things that we want to look at first, we're going to use this image link. So we're going to hit copy. We're going to paste that right into here. And we're going to use the default port of 7878. Geez, I can't type today. Sorry, guys. And we're going to put that in both fields there. So the other thing I want to point out is the volumes and the environments. We're going to need those. So let's head down to the volumes tab. And in this case, I'm going to have my main 2, because that's all you need. You need the config. So this will just be config. And then this one will be media, because that's where everything's going to be stored. So I'm going to add a third one, because we're going to go over scenario number 2 in case you have a primary with secondary devices. And we'll just call that one media NFS. So for the first config, we're going to change that to bind, and we're just going to type in our path for where our container data is stored. And this is under container. And then we'll create the folder Radarr. For the media, if this is scenario number 1, where all the data is stored on one device, this path is going to be home / my username / media. Scenario 2, if we have the shares mounted via an NFS, we can keep this as volume, and because we already mounted these in Portainer from the previous video, I can just select my media NFS, and now those secondary devices are mounted and good to go and tied in with Radarr here. Let's click on our network tab. We're going to select our default of or not our default, but the external network that we created. And we're going to select under environment. We're going to add the 3 fields here. So the first one will be the PUID, PGID, and our time zone. I like to keep this at 0. This way I have the administrative privilege for the group, even though I still have the main user set to 1,000. This just helps with like some, permission settings when it comes to folders, things like that. I just, my preference, I'm okay with giving it administrative privilege for the group, not for the user, but for the group. Labels, we don't have anything in there. Restart policy, we'll change this to unless stop. That way, if the container or if the system reboots, has a firmware update, a power outage, this container will start up automatically. Runtime and resources, we don't need anything there. Capabilities, we don't need anything there either. So this looks good. I can hit deploy the container now. This will pull the image from Linux server and give this a second to pull and download. Looks like it's good and starting up. We'll give that another second. This should work now with this link. Perfect. Yeah. So we're up and running with the initial configuration page. This lets us set up some settings. We'll come back to this. Let's get Sonarr installed. Now I'm going to show you guys a little trick because we're using the Linux server. And again, the reason why you can use this trick is because if we were to look at the settings in here for what's being inputted, they're basically the same because they're the ARR apps. So the ARR apps are part of like a whole family. So you can actually kind of copy these settings over, because if we were to go now to Sonarr, and same thing, we go to downloads, we go to Docker. Again, it lists the same common pitfalls, but if we go over to the Linux server for the Sonarr latest, and let me go back here. Yeah, so this should pull the latest compose file. If you notice here, it's pretty much the same thing as what was already on here. So I'm going to go show you guys a little trick. Really, the only thing we need here is just that. And this is, again, the nice part about Portainer. So we can actually now take this and we can hit duplicate and edit. And now we're basically duplicating this container. Now just be very, very careful here, because there are some things that you have to make sure that you obviously change. Otherwise, you're going to have some issues. So the first of which is you need to give it a different name than Radarr. So in this case, we're going to label this Sonarr, and we need to make sure we put Sonarr's image in here. Obviously change the port. In this case, we're on 8989 and also on 8989. Those are the default ports for Sonarr here. And when we go down to everything that's inside of these volumes, really, we just got to change the one thing here. Instead of it being Radarr, we're just going to change it to Sonarr. Network's still going to be the same, but let's delete any fields that are in there so that way there's no issues with conflicts. And then in terms of the environment tab, delete everything out of here except for what was in or what was required for the initial setup, which would, in this case, we only had those 3 things, which were the PUID, the GUID, PGID, and the time zone. So all these other settings here, just clear those out. That makes, just so you're not creating any type of conflicts with information that was being previously pulled from the last container, because by doing a duplicate this way, the last thing you want to be doing is copying over settings in Radarr when you really shouldn't. I mean, this is just a shortcut. And the same thing with this. For the labels, just delete everything that's in here. As if because this is basically saying, or as if you were completing or creating a brand new container versus like creating a new one. So that's why I'm just, again, you could do it the other way, the long way. This is just a shortcut because we already created the Radarr container already. So again, just make sure that everything's blank in there. There's no labels. Restart policies, the same on must stop. Runtime and resources, that's fine. Capabilities, that's fine. So this is okay. If I deploy this now, same thing. This should be working. If we wait for this to download and I click on the link here, give this a second. Yep, perfect. So if I click on this, wait for this to boot up, there we go. So we're greeted with the initialization page and we're ready to go. So we have Sonarr, Radarr set up. This is good. The last thing we're going to want to set up, because this is going to help with Sonarr and Radarr, is Prowlarr. So all we got to do now is if we go back to Linux server site, you'll actually see Prowlarr listed under here. So Prowlarr, and again, they also have like the website for it as well. I'm just, doing this real quick to make it nice and easy. So the only thing that we need here, we can do the same thing. We're going to copy this. So if we go back into our containers, we're going to add container. We're going to call this Prowlarr. We're going to paste that in there. And we're going to use the default port. So in this case for Prowlarr, if we scroll down to the config here, you'll see it's under 9696. So we're going to just paste that in there. This one's going to be a little bit different because for Prowlarr, we don't need anything except for the configuration path. So I only have to mount that one volume there. So for volumes, we're just going to mount one. So we're going to call this config. We're going to bind that to /container/Prowlarr. So that's set up. Network's going to be external. Environment, we're going to add the 3 environment tabs, PUID, PGID, time zone, 1000, 0, America, New York. And again, we're just copying what's on here. We're just using the same environments as what they're suggesting for us. So that looks good. If we go back here, don't need anything in the labels, restart policy unless stop, nothing in runtime and resources, and nothing in capabilities. So I can hit deploy this container now. Give this a second to pull the image, and then we'll wait for that once that's done to take a second to get configured and boot up. If I click on this now, perfect. We're greeted with the initialization screen on here as well. So we got Prowlarr, Sonarr, and Radarr set up. Real quick, what this would look like if you were installing this on a QNAP device, and I'll also give the links in the comments below. I'll pin this comment to showcase, what other devices will use these prefixes, because everybody's going to be different. So if I was installing this, and let's just kind of go back into Radarr, and let's just say we were installing this fresh here. So we're copying the settings, right? So I wanted to just kind of point out, because again, we're using this testing environment on an Ubuntu instance. If I was using QNAP, it would actually be different, because the way that QNAP works in terms of where the folders are stored. So in this case, if I had my container here, this is my folder that I make on my QNAP system. Excuse me. So I have a container folder with all my configs stored inside of here. So if I were to, let's say, deploy this on QNAP, what I would be using instead of just container or Radarr, I actually need to add a prefix to it. This is going to be just share. So if I do share in front of my /container/Radarr, that's how I would install it on QNAP devices. If this was a Synology device, it's going to be volume 1. If it was on, and I'll leave a description below depending on what system you have, because I know there's like a ton of different things that have, the Western Digital stuff, the other ones. I'll leave a description on, for what you need. Just be mindful of that. And that goes for everything. So if I, if I'm on QNAP, how I have my media folder set up is for my QNAP device, it's set up as share/media, meaning like if I wanted this folder in QNAP to be mounted in that Portainer instance, because again, I'm using Portainer for everything. That's what that file path would look like. So you would have to have the /share in front of media, depending on your device. All right, now that that's covered, let's head over to the actual installation part of everything, and we'll go over all the settings that I have here. So let's start with Radarr first. Now for Radarr, I'm just going to use the basic authentication method here. And the reason for that is because in a future video, I'll go over exactly how to set up Authentic, which will require basically a browser pop-up which has credentials enabled. It just adds a layer of security when it comes to, let's say, accessing this from outside of your network. But for now, we're just going to real basic, set this up so that it's just disabled for local addresses. I'll use my regular username and Mr. Buckwheat. I'll set a password for this as well. And I'll confirm that password. And I'll hit save. So here we are in the settings for Radarr. So I'm just going to real quick, we're going to go over everything here. So you have your main tab, which would show if you had movies already. Well, first let's import them. This will kind of give you a basic rundown. So we'll go, okay, yeah. So we'll do import existing movies and we'll start an import. So here's the file browser that'll actually let us choose our root folder. So I have those two folders mounted. Scenario 1 would be media. Scenario 2 would be media NFS. So we're going to use the media NFS. And if you see, Radarr has access to these files because these folders are showing up inside of it. That's a good thing. So we're going to use our testing environment. And again, I have my media with another TV shows, movies, and downloads folder in there. And I'm going to choose the movies folder. I don't want to choose the folder with the movies in it. I want the main movies folder acting as the main root folder in Radarr. So once I have that selected, I'll hit OK. You'll see that there are now 2 unmapped files here, unmapped folders. And to take care of that, I'll just click on the path link and they should match up automatically with whatever the movie is. You'll have the option to monitor it. You'll have the option to change the quality profile. For now, we're just going to leave this as any because we're going to come back to this later once we set up the said profiles. So I'll click import at the bottom here. Now when I click on movies, there you go. There are my 2 movies in my media library. So that way they're matching up with what Radarr's seeing. And it shows that the files are green with the relative path of where those files are. So we're good on that. Now, if you wanted to add something, you'll just click on add new and then you'll type in a movie name. Let's type in whatever it is. And here's everything on there. You'll click add or monitor. You'll choose your profile. You'll be good to go. You can also set up additional folders. Let's just say, again, for the testing purposes, you're in scenario 2 and you had multiple NASs or multiple devices. You can add multiple folders on there. Let's say you have an anime folder. You can add that as well. So, you can keep going on and on. I do recommend keeping everything in the one, obviously the media folder with one underneath that. But again, let's just say if I were to, for testing purposes, let's just say I had an anime folder with everything in there. Oh, that's TV shows. We got to go to movies. I could add this folder. Now I have a separate anime. As long as everything's stored under the media NFS folder, you can add as many folders as you want in terms of organizing everything. But I do recommend keeping a main movies and then, anime. Keep those separate at least. You can do a media 4K or regular media 1080p. I keep everything 1080p 4K all under one file because my profiles have fallbacks. So that way it's always looking for 4K. And if that's not available, it falls back to 1080p. So that being said, you'll have the option to discover. So this is kind of how you're able to see what's trending. And these just have basic list imports and we can add more lists if we want. And then you'll have a calendar that lets you know once you have media monitored, it'll let you know whether or not it's in theaters, if it's downloaded, if it's missing, when it debuts, maybe when the Blu-ray comes out. So this is a great calendar that you can use to kind of keep track of specific dates of when stuff's releasing, as well as your activity feed. This lets you know exactly what's going on with your queue, your history, as well as any releases or files that may have been blacklisted or blocklisted from being grabbed or downloaded. You'll have a wanted tab. This will let you know exactly once you start adding a lot of stuff to your monitors, your monitor section. This will kind of keep everything in a nice, clean organization. You can even filter this out depending on certain options. You can search for stuff. You can have everything search automatically for you. You can even take a look at cutoff on Met. We're going to ignore this cutoff on Met. And again, the reason being is because we're going to have a profile that has basically a very, very high score for said content. So the media is never going to have a cutoff score or a score that's met because the score is going to be so high. But again, we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's just kind of go over the settings first. So in media management, these are all your settings when it comes to adding a renaming option. So we're going to turn that on so that way all of our file names are renamed and updated to what we want. We'll also have profiles. We're going to clear these out initially. And the reason for that is because we're going to be adding our own profiles. So we don't want to use the default ones here. because we're going to be having or using custom formats, and we can get rid of all this stuff. So we'll delete those out. We're going to keep the any just as a fallback in case we're searching for something and for some reason can't find it. We'll use the any profile to search for it. Quality is where you're going to be able to score said content based on your the formats or quality profiles or quality formats, excuse me, that'll get a rating based upon bit rates. So for example, if you look at, let's just say a DVD on average in terms of you preferring, you're looking at a 5.6 gigabit per hour with a maximum of 5.9 gigabits per hour. So these are basically your limits when it comes to, let's say, grabbing a file, determining how large a file can potentially be to quote unquote grab. Custom formats, we're going to circle back to this, but this is where you're going to be adding custom formats that'll have scores associated with said content. Here's where you'll add your indexers, and you don't have to do this in here because we have Prowlarr set up, and Prowlarr is going to manage this for us automatically. Download clients, you're going to set those up manually. I'll cover this in a future tutorial because this requires to have a torrent client installed or a NZB client installed, and I'll go over both QBitTorrent as well as SAB NZB in a future video. And I'm going to be doing that in the next video. So import list, this is where we can grab or add our custom list. So if you have a TMDB account, or if you want to just use the generalized popular list from those databases, you can import these directly into Radarr, so that when you click on that Discover tab from the beginning, those lists will automatically be imported, as well as if you're monitoring stuff from your track list or from your list, they automatically get imported. So what's great about this is if you tie this to Plex and you're in the Discover tab, and say you click on that movie and you're like, oh, I want to add this to my watch list, this will now sync up in Radarr so that it's automatically added. So I believe the sync up is every 6 hours, but again, if you use that Discover tab in Plex, because that feature is awesome. It lets you browse anything and everything under the sun, what's popular, what's trending, and then all you got to do is hit add to watch list, and now it automatically syncs up in Radarr. Finally, you can also add, this is a cool one too, you can add a custom RSS list. So, if you're tech savvy enough to create your own list, this is where you'll import that. Finally, there'll be a connection tab here. What you'll do with this is connect this to Plex, because any change that's made on, let's say, an import or an upgrade, a rename, a file's deleted, whatever the case may be, this just sends a little notification to Plex, giving it like a little nudge saying, hey, we updated this file, we updated this folder, do a quick little library scan, make sure everything's up to date, make sure that the file names match, whatever the case may be, the paths are correct, so that way the said content, the second that it's added, will automatically sync up with Plex so that it can be played. So it's good to connect these with that, and again, very simple to do. Metadata, I leave blank. I don't really do anything in here because of the fact that Plex has a great scraper. Plex is going to be adding all the metadata that we need to the said file. And since we're going to be using a custom naming scheme, we will not have any issue when it comes to matching up the file names in Plex. Like, you'll never have to do a manual match ever again. It'll always work because of what we're going to be using in the files or the file names. Tags you can ignore. General, these are just your general settings, like changing the port numbers, things like that. Don't touch this unless you're familiar with what you're doing, but basically this is how you would, let's say, assign a different port other than 7878. Maybe you're running 2 instances of Radarr, one for 4K, one for 1080p. You could change this to 7879 or something, and then you would obviously edit that in the container settings as well to match those instances. And again, you can label this 4K depending on how you have everything set up. Finally, for security, we already went over that when we first set everything up, but what's going to be important, and we're going to be using this a lot, is this API key here. This is basically how Radarr is able to communicate with other apps via the API links. So provided you have the IP address or the local IP address of the instance, which is always going to be for my testing environment, will be the 192.168.1.34. We'll use that API, sync this with Prowlarr, so that way we can sync up all our indexes. So that's kind of what Prowlarr is. Prowlarr is the same thing as Jacket, if you've heard of that. It's a syncing tool that lets or pushes all of your index settings to your ARR apps. So we'll configure that later. But for now, like I said, we just want to kind of go over everything. When it comes to the proxy, you can ignore that unless you need a proxy in order to establish a connection. Most people are not going to have this setting enabled. And then finally and this is different. Proxy is different than reverse proxy. Side note. And then finally, in terms of like updates, things like that, you don't have to touch any of this because it's automatically configured through Portainer and Watchtower. Watchtower is grabbing the latest version for us automatically, so we don't have to do anything like that. Backups, I keep that as is. The UI, this is all custom to your preference, whether or not you want the theme set, light, dark theme, your formats for your dates and times. Finally, your system settings. This is just a little rundown in terms of like the status of what's going on. Your health messages, if there's any issues with maybe an indexer's not working or if there's maybe a data corruption, this is kind of where you'll see that. You'll also have the ability to perform tasks like health updates, checking backups, importing list syncs, message cleanups. This is where you'll do that under this tab, and you'll just kind of click each of these if you want to run these manually. But for the most part, they are set to be automatically run, and they'll let you know the intervals here for each of the corresponding tasks. Finally, for your backup, this is where you'll be able to perform a manual or if you wanted to restore a backup. And again, this is done automatically, but if you were to just click on backup now, that's a manual backup. I would be able to click on this and save this to my computer. And then if I wanted to restore it, again, clicking on the same file, and then I click restore, and then all the settings and everything that I have in Radarr would be pushed to this instance. Updates, this kind of just gives you a little log of what's going on and what's changed. Events, this is kind of all the tasks that are happening in real time. And then finally, your log files in case you have some serious issues and you're trying to see or diagnose exactly what's going on. This is where you'll access that. Again, all of these settings that I just covered are the same for Sonarr. Everything that you see in here in terms of like setting things up, profiles, media management, all of these categories are identical since these are basically, sister apps. They're made by the same developers, or at least I think so. If I'm not, I apologize if, I'd stand corrected if they're not. But they are part of like the ARR family where basically the formats and how the layouts are set up, they're pretty much the same. They're pretty much identical. Again, Radarr deals with movies, Sonarr deals with TV shows. All right. That being said, since we've covered everything in terms of the settings for Radarr, let's talk about how we're going to set up profiles. And first, we're going to kind of switch gears and we're going to head over to the Trash Guides website. So scrolling back up, you're going to notice there are settings for, depending on the program that you're running, for Sonarr and Radarr. We're going to start with Radarr first. So what is a profile? A profile is basically a generalized category or instructions that you import into Sonarr or Radarr that say, okay, this is what I'm looking to do. I'm looking for, or I want to set up a library that's going to consist of 4K content, 1080p content, Blu-rays, remixes, high efficiency encodes, whatever the case may be, DVDs, everything from quality, resolution to editions, theatrical versus special edition, IMAX versus standard, a true HD Atmos versus Dolby Digital Plus. I mean, everything under the sun. Really, this is kind of where the automation comes into part. So how do you set up this automation? You're going to be setting this automation through profiles. So right off the bat, when you click on Radarr, you're going to be greeted with kind of just like a quick rundown of how things work. And by clicking each of these sections here, it'll kind of cover what things that you need to apply in order to set these profiles up. So the very first thing that we're going to have to do, again, just by going in order here, is we're going to have to set up a couple of quality settings. What these are basically saying, okay, so for anything that's a WebDL 1080p, I want to set a maximum megabit per minute. So that way, when it comes to, one file being preferred over the other, or adding a score, or adding some type of boundary so that I'm not downloading or getting or grabbing something that may be a poor version, or doesn't meet my standards. These are basically just kind of great quality definitions, so that way we're setting boundaries and thresholds for media. So how you do this is you'll head back over into Radarr, and underneath quality, you'll have all the definitions here. Again, settings, quality, you'll see all the quality names here, and then their corresponding settings to the right. So really what we'll do is just kind of go through each of these one by one. I'm not going to do this. I'll just do the first one here and match them up. So let's take a look at HD TV, 720p. I want to set that as a minimum of 17.1 with a maximum of 400. So I find HD TV 720p. I'll set the minimum of 17.1 with a maximum of 400. And then I'll hit save, and then that'll apply it. The other thing to kind of keep in mind is when they are setting these up in terms of the preferred is, and they give you these, and they say the reason why you don't see the preferred score on the table is because we want max quality anyway. So set it to high as possible. So now when we go back in here, we're going to set the preferred to also 400 and then hit save changes. In this case, it defaults it to 399, which is the maximum possible. That's what we want. You're going to do that for all of the settings here. And again, just going through each one of these, this will cover everything that you need. You don't have to worry about anything else on here. You don't have to worry about any of the extra ones on here, because those profiles we're not going to be focused on. I mean, we'll still have those in the any profile, but they'll be a fallback. And again, they won't matter. Leaving them as default will be okay. All right. So now that we have the quality definition set up, and again, we're just going to click the save button here to make sure that everything is saved. We're going to head over to the next tab, which is the naming scheme. What this will do is this will make sure that anything that we have on our system, when it comes to renaming it or organizing the files and folders, that Plex, as well as any other program, will be able to see it and organize it and pull the correct data from it. So how do we do this? Basically, again, just following the guides here, we're going to enable a couple of settings. So we're going to go into Radarr. We're going to go into our media management. We're going to make sure that we have advanced shown, and you'll see how this is unticked. If we click on show advanced, we get a couple of different settings here. We want to make sure that we click this rename movies, and we're going to see the format, the standard movie format, and then we're also going to see the movie folder format. We're going to change both of these. So if we head down to the standard movie format, we want to copy the Plex setting. And if we just click this little copy to clipboard icon here, we can paste that by selecting all and then pasting that right in there. As well as if you had anime, you could also use this as well. If you scroll down, you're going to want to look for the movie folder format, and we're going to copy the Plex version as well. So we're going to copy that to clipboard, head over to the movie folder format and hit V, and then hit save changes. So now our naming scheme is set up so that we're good to go. And again, just kind of going back here, there's all guides that tell you exactly what to do. It shows you, step by step with picture, where to click, what to do, how it works, and then everything's listed in here. Since we're using Plex, we're going to keep the Plex. Okay. The next thing we're going to look at are custom formats. So this is going to be important because basically what we're going to be doing is we're going to be assigning scores to everything from movie versions like IMAX, IMAX Enhanced, Dolby Vision, 265, HQ Remix. If it's on a streaming service, everything's going to get a score. At the end of the day, all these scores add up. Some scores obviously are higher than others, and they basically provide a ranking system. When we set said scores, we basically are setting the criteria up so that we are downloading or grabbing, or ripping, whatever it is, the versions that we know are the best possible for our system and our setups. So how to import, let's just say they're going to use this as an example. They're going to use a Blu-ray disc as a custom format. So if I were to right click on this and open this up in a new link, this will basically give me the custom format definition or the information on what this actually is. and then it'll give me a JSON file. And this is important because this JSON file is what we're going to need. So we're going to click copy here for this JSON file. We're going to head back over to Radarr now, and we're going to go down to custom formats. And when we click on this, we're going to click on the plus icon, and we don't even have to enter anything in here. We can go straight into import in the bottom left, and we're going to paste that JSON file that we just copied, and then click on import and hit save. Now, this custom format has been added into Radarr for us to provide a score to when we start setting up the profile. So this is good. If we go back to Radarr now, or excuse me, if we go back to the trash guides, this is going to be important. What this is going to do, now that we've learned how to do this, we can also update it. Applies the same process. Sorry. If we just click on the thing, we just click on update. This shows you how to paste it again. And then we just hit save. And that's how you basically update the, if there was maybe a change or a different format came out. There's also some automatic programs that can sync this up. There's Recycler. I'll cover that in a future video as well. But for now, unfortunately, I'm going to be showing you guys the long way to set this up. And the reason being is because obviously I want you guys to know what these things are. So when it comes to setting up those automated scripts, you'll know exactly what they are and what they mean. So finally, once we have those custom formats, or we know how to set those custom formats, now we can take a look at setting up our quality profiles. So there's a flowchart, and if you just click on this flowchart here, that brings you or shows you where or what to add depending on how your setup is. So things like a TV that supports Dolby Vision. If maybe you have a Samsung TV and you have HDR10 Plus, maybe you don't have any of those and your TV only supports HDR or HDR10. If you have a soundbar that supports Atmos, if you have a receiver that maybe supports True HD Atmos, if you don't have any of those and you just have a TV, this flowchart will basically let you know how to add profiles or custom formats, so that way you're scoring things correctly, because different people's setups are going to have or want different scores. For example, let's just say I want a remix version of a movie. I want the untouched video in terms of the highest quality. So I'm going to choose remix plus web. Okay. Do I have an Apple TV? No. So I can skip down to here. Do I want 4K or do I want 1080p? I want 4K. So I'm going to have all HDR formats selected. Does every device in your household support Dolby Vision? Yes. Or actually, excuse me, I'm gonna, yes, sorry. Do you share your library with family, friends, or family members that don't have Dolby Vision? Yes, I also do that. So my devices support it. Plus I have friends and family that do not have Dolby Vision TVs. So I'm going to have a custom format Dolby Vision WebDL set with a score of -10,000. So really, again, just following the flowchart will tell you what to do. Okay, so if we're looking at this example, okay, I have my Remix plus Web. So we're going to be one of these two options here. And I want 4K. So I'm going to use this one. So I'm going to click on Remix plus Web, 4K. And now you're going to see here all of these options. So if we go down to, again, if we click on like the quality settings for the file size, you'll see that you'll have all these formats set up. So we're going to copy those. That's okay. If we go back now, you're going to have the recommended naming scheme, which we've already done. So that's okay. You're going to look now, here are these expandable tabs. It's going to talk about audio, and it's going to cover, again, depending on your devices and what you have set up, why you should do things a certain way. Here's like, example of if you have an Apple TV, what's supported versus what's not supported. Why are you using, or am I losing any quality using, LPCM. This goes into, talking about like True HD Atmos and Dolby DTS formats. I mean, there's all sorts of support here and detailed information depending on your setup. And it's very, very valuable. Again, I wish I knew about this when I first set everything up, because, you know, setting everything up initially the correct way is ideally the situation, because you don't want to be doing double the work, or, you know, grabbing everything again or deleting everything and starting over. So setting these profiles up before you do anything is very important. And again, so you're just going to follow these scores here. Since my setup has all the HDR formats, I'm going to import all of these custom formats. So how I do that is I just right click on each of these formats. This will bring me to a new tab. I'm going to grab the JSON files. We're going to copy those, head back over into Radarr into my custom formats, and I'm just going to hit import and paste those in. That's it. I'll hit save. True HD Atmos is saved. Good to go. So you're going to do this for each of these formats, following your flowchart, following all your HDR formats. And then again, there's going to be breaks. This is going to be complicated. This is going to be the most time consuming. I apologize. It does suck, but the thing is, you only have to do this once. So, you know, setting this up the right way is going to prevent some issues later on when it comes to, you know, scoring everything and automating everything. That being said, once you finally get all this stuff set up, once everything's good to go, you're going to come down to the main settings for the profiles. So what that looks like, once I have all my custom formats here set up, we're going to head over now to profiles, and I'm just going to refresh this real quick. Yep. Okay. So nothing's in there. So I'm going to click the plus icon. If you notice, here's all the custom formats that we just added. So I'm just going to follow this guide. So I'm looking for the Remix plus Web 2160. So I'm not going to give it this name. I'm just going to choose a name that's a little like simpler for me. So in this case, Ultra HD 4K Remix. So this way I know what this is, or my profile set up. And again, I'm just going to be following along with the guides here. So when this talks about the qualities over here, you're going to see this option where it says, okay, you're going to want to do a remix with Web 2160p. So those are the only two things that are checked. So how this works, if we go back in here, so I'm going to check this and I'm going to drag it up. And then the other setting that you see here is Web 2160p, which has WebRip and WebDL both in there. So Web 2160p, WebRip, and WebDL edited in it. Let's just say for some reason, if these weren't in there, or maybe there were two here, what you can do is when you click on Edit Groups, you'll see the option to drag and remove things. So for example, we'll just kind of use this as a test. Let's say I wanted to group these two things together, Blu-ray 2160p and HD TV 2160p. I would just open these up and drag it into there, and then I would hit Done Editing Groups. And now if you see how these are now grouped together, whereas before they were separate, this is how you're able to edit groups. And then they also recommend, when it comes to adding things, dragging things to the bottom of the list. This way, in case for some reason these aren't found and maybe you still want to look at maybe like a Blu-ray 1080p, put that underneath it, because when it comes to sorting everything out, it'll keep what you want at the top, and then what you're then maybe using as a fallback after that. And then stuff that you don't want, like stuff that you really don't want, you drag all the way to the bottom. This way, that'll be at like the very bottom of the list. Add a site item, you won't even see that. Okay. So now that we covered that, you'll again just copy these settings, and then they go into detail. They show you exactly what to do with everything. Setting like a minimum custom format score to 0 on here, upgrading until 10,000, and setting your language for English. Or if you want, they actually use original. So that way, in case, like, you know, maybe you're looking for like Japanese movies or anime, by choosing whatever the original version is, you're going to be making sure that those movie versions are not necessarily dubbed or have the original tracks on them. Excuse me. And then finally, here's where you're going to be using the score. So for example, we knew that the Blu-ray disc had a score of negative 10,000. So I can set that in here. And then the Atmos, I believe, was 5,000. Yes. So the True HD Atmos was 5,000. I'll set a score here for 5,000. And I'll do this again for all the custom formats that I enter. Everything that I put in here will get a custom, will have the format and the associated score with it. When you're all done, you'll hit save. Now that profile's saved, of course it's not saving. Groups must contain multiple qualities. Oh, sorry. Let me do. This is going to upgrade until this. And then. Oh, what happened here? Why did this go? Oh, I think it's because I deleted one of these. Let me edit this. And then we'll change this back here. And now it's saved. I don't know why this is saved. Of course this doesn't save. We'll just say cancel and do it in there. All right, so we'll just do, sorry guys, real quick. 4K remix. We're going to put this as 10,000. Upgrade until. Boom, boom. Put this at the top. Gotta love it when things don't work out because I'm doing too many things. And this was 5,000. And we got the two formats there. So hit save. Now that works. Okay. Sorry. So yeah, so here's our profile that's said and done. Now, if we came back to our movies, and let's just say I wanted to upgrade this or select this as, say, a remix file, I would just go into edit, change my quality profile from any to Ultra HD 4K remix, hit save, and now that profile is set up. If I want to do a quick search automatically, I would then search for movie, or I can do an interactive search. Now, these two aren't going to work as just yet because obviously nothing's set up. But the same thing applies for Sonarr. And again, just kind of showing you real quick, I'll just set that up with some basic authentication. Oh. Mr. Buckwheat. And really what I'm doing is I'm just making these the same to make it nice and easy, because once I get everything set up, it'll be good. But yeah, like the settings and like I said, the custom formats, everything's the same here. And what this would look like in Sonarr, if we just scroll up to Sonarr here, it's the same thing. You have the same settings where it comes to quality settings, recommended naming schemes, importing custom formats. They show you how to do that, as well as setting up your quality profiles. Sonarr is a little bit easier because they really only do two. They do 1080p and they do 4K. So that's it. Those are really the only two profiles that you need. You can kind of get into some advanced profiles, but what I recommend is first using these. That way you kind of become familiar with how things are set up and making sure that this is these formats and these files are working the correct way for you before you start changing other things around, like adding maybe a special profile or, a custom profile. I have a couple custom profiles with my instance. And the only reason for that is because over the years, I've added things like 1080p fallback to my 4K remixes, as well as my Ultra HD Blu-rays. I've set those qualities up, and I've also added file size restrictions because I'm also using TDAR. So when I'm re-encoding stuff or I'm scraping like extra audio tracks out or subtitles out, things like that, I'm updating the files accordingly and giving them fresh and newer scores. So the point is, you can go crazy with this stuff. But this is kind of like the bread and butter when it comes to the automation part. Again, trash guides, that info, a ton of information on here that goes over everything and anything when it comes to questions you may have, custom formats with a score of 0, audio channel setup, hell, they even go over like Dolby Vision stuff and troubleshooting tips. The final thing that we want to cover now that we got Radarr and Sonarr set up, I just want to show you really quick what Prowlarr does. So again, if we just kind of set up the basic authentication here for Prowlarr, what Prowlarr does is sync everything up to Sonarr and Radarr. So how does that work? We're going to go into settings. We're going to click on apps, and we're going to add an application. The first of which, let's start with Radarr. So we're going to do, we're going to keep the settings the same here for me. I like to use a full sync. That way any changes I make in Prowlarr are automatically pushed to all my ARR apps. So right now we only have Sonarr and Radarr, but this will also include Radarr, LiDAR, multiple instances of Radarr and Sonarr. Everything will get synced up. So I'm going to change the local host just to my local IP address. So which is the 192.168.1.34. And I'm going to keep the port the same, 9696. 192.168.1.34. And the reason why I do this with the local host is because let's just say I am accessing this from outside of my local network or on another device. The last thing I want to have is any type of IP conflict. So by just manually specifying the local IP of the device, it just prevents any errors or potential conflicts with, things not loading. Last thing we'll need for Radarr is the API key. Again, how to get that? If we just go into settings, scroll down to general, and there is the API key right here. So I'll hit copy. I'll head back into Prowlarr. Oh, where is it? And I'll paste this in here. If I hit test, this should be green. Perfect. So that's good. I'll hit save. I'll also do Sonarr real quick. So going over to Sonarr, general, we copy the API here and then paste that in, change the 192.168.1.34. And we'll make this easier by copying this, paste that into there, hit test. Perfect. Those are good. So now, if we were to add an indexer, let's just say I have, an NZB indexer and I wanted to add one of these guys. All you have to do is you click on this, follow the instructions when it comes to importing your API key or login credentials, hit test and save. For now, what we'll do is obviously since none of the NZB stuff is private, we're going to have to use a public one. And again, we're just using this for testing purposes. I do not condone anything when it comes to, doing anything illegal. But here's one that's kind of popular. Excuse me. Here's like another one. I don't know. Maybe I'll use this one. So yeah. So all you got to do is just kind of import this and enabled. Everything's already configured here. There's no additional settings we got to do. Let's just do a test real quick. That looks good. We'll hit save and close. We're going to sync the app indexers. Now you'll notice once this syncs, if we go back to Sonarr and Radarr, under my indexers, give this a second to get pushed as this is syncing up with the apps. So yeah, we can close this out. These are good. These are good. Oh, and Trash also kind of talks about this as well for setting up proxies for certain indexers. They tell you exactly how to do that as well. So an HTTP proxy, things like that, all sorts of settings in here. They have tutorials on setting up indexers with limited APIs. Okay, so that looks like that's synced. If we go now to Radarr and we go back to our indexers, look at that. Prowlarr pushed this. And you could see here, there's the Prowlarr name in parentheses there. That just lets you know that everything is synced up and synced via the URL. So Prowlarr will manage that. It'll test these indexers automatically for you. It'll assign the categories and everything that you need, so you don't have to worry about setting them up. Like I said, this is kind of like Jacket. So I do recommend you set Prowlarr up just because, again, dealing with all the ARRs, it makes it very simple to keep things organized and synced up. But for the most part, like I said, copying everything over to Sonarr, really we're just going to be using the same settings as we did in Radarr. And one last thing to kind of show you guys real quick, I'm just going to go over to my settings here. Give me one sec as I pull up my instance to kind of show you what this looks like for my Radarr. So here's mine. And if we were to look at, again, my library and my settings, my profiles are set up this way. So I have my anime profile, which has the all corresponding scores set up with those. I also have my main profile, which has 4K set as the default with a 1080p fallback. So this prioritizes IMAX releases, all the custom formats for all the HDR as well as HD audio. Those are all scored individually and basically fully organized. And then I have my negative numbers as well. Things like Dolby Vision, WebDL. Remember, that was following the flowchart, depending on devices in your household. I don't like things that are upscaled unless they've actually released in 4K. I don't want somebody doing things like that. as well as I have some file size limitations. Those again are just my custom settings. And then I have my remix profile here, which is set up so that I'm, all the custom formats based on the trash guides profile as well. So again, all this stuff runs in the background. I don't have to do anything. I just kind of set it and forget it. And I have my list monitored or list set up as well, so that I'm adding stuff via Plex. I'm adding stuff via Tracked. I'm also adding stuff via Overseer, and it just goes right into Sonarr and Radarr. And again, I don't have to think about it. I don't have to worry about it. It's doing everything in the background. All right, so we got Sonarr, Radarr, and Prowlarr up and running, and they're all communicating with each other, so we're good to go. The profiles and custom formats from Trash Guides are installed, so we're making sure that we have the best content available with that ranking system. If you haven't already, again, please subscribe to my channel. That way you're notified about any future videos I have, as I'll be covering all the containers that I have installed and tutorials on how to set those up, as well as leave a like and comment below if you have any questions. Here's the email and my Discord handle if you want to reach out to me and maybe book a one-on-one session if you're having some trouble, as I do offer personal services as well. So thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you on the next video.